Well, good morning, Ruth.
Hi, good morning, Devin.
We're so happy that you were able to join us today for the next episode of BioBlast. I'm Devin Zeidelman, Director of Scientific Real Estate Advisory Services with Shear Partners. We are delighted to welcome Ruth Chang, the General Manager and Senior Vice President for Research and Industrial Solutions at ATCC.
It's so great to be here with you, Devin. We're very excited to be nominated for this award and have this opportunity to chat with you.
Yeah, so we're going to dive into a lot of different things, but at face value, what is ATCC? And a lot of what you're doing ranges from biological repositories to ensuring QA and QC and research support, thinking about standardization on the public health side, and then also for private industry. And so we'd love to learn more about ATCC and your role there.
Absolutely. What ATCC does, you're right, is very wide ranging. In essence, we provide scientists with essential biomaterials. So we're the world's largest provider of cell lines, microbial strains, and the largest and most diverse collection of human and animal cell lines.
And obviously there's a rising and rapid need when you think about some of the trends affecting the industry on the therapeutic side, certainly on the precision medicine, cell and gene therapy side. So I'm sure you all have been very busy scaling the business and scaling the company. You started your role there as the Chief Strategy, Innovation, and Corporate Development Officer. And so you've evolved your role at the company. But before talking more about ATCC and what you're doing, we'd love to get more of your background and just sort of the arc of your career.
Sure. So I started my career as a scientist at Boston Scientific right out of graduate school. I did doctoral work around tissue engineering, was interested in cardiovascular disease. And so as a scientist at Boston Scientific, I was developing drug device combination products that quickly transitioned to do portfolio planning, clinical strategy, all kinds of things across multiple therapeutic areas. I went from Boston Scientific to Smith and Nephew, and there I built and led teams that invested in and incubated new opportunities for Smith and Nephew, led strategic planning across a multi-billion-dollar division there. And then I said, okay, big company experiences, I've done that. I gave the startup thing a try. I joined a startup called Agnovos, was there for a number of years as a VP of strategy, led clinical and regulatory strategy, among other things there. After that, I came to ATCC. It was just a wonderful opportunity at the time. I didn't have nonprofit experience. And so I was really able to leverage my business acumen and my scientific curiosity into this role.
Yeah, and it's important to note that ATCC is a nonprofit organization. And so how has that differed in the way you approach strategy from being in the private sector?
Well, so we need to have revenue even as a nonprofit to sustain the work that we do. That's very important. So having those base business understanding and practices in place is critical to having ATCC be the provider of critical life science tools, reagents, materials for another 100 years. ATCC started in 1925 and now is a worldwide provider of supporting not just life science research, but environmental science. I know that's your background, and even food science, any new industry that requires a solid foundation on scientific discovery really relies on ATCC biomaterials.
Yeah, and so on a global footprint, or thinking about it from a global perspective, there's a lot of conversations that right now, just in terms of onshoring, IP protection, potentially looking at some emerging jurisdictions that are doing really important work on the translational research side. And so, when you think about just sort of the global macro as it pertains to this industry and sector, and you think about the last 10 or 5 years, obviously we're a very connected world, and scientists are even more connected because it's such a small community. What trends are you seeing globally in your space that folks should be aware of, and how is that evolving?
Yeah. Well, at ATCC, we've always taken into our collection from across the globe. So scientists recognize ATCC as a place to deposit materials and then be able to have that disseminated for research and discovery worldwide. So we've always played that central role globally. We're US headquarters with significant operations in Maryland and in the greater capital region. But from a trend perspective, what we're seeing is that need for standards, right? When we think about biologics and the need for standards really to ensure that the supply is tested in the right way, the processes are validated with the right control materials, and done in a consistent manner. We are a standards setting organization as well, and an official SDO, Standards Development Organization. And so around biologics, biosimilars, cell and gene therapy, even any new emerging field, that standards presence is really important to ensure global quality and safety.
Yeah, which is such a core component of really what everyone is doing. And I say everyone in terms of private sector and public sector, public sector being the likes of NIH, National Science Foundation, other research institutions. But, with that said, there's been a lot of conversations about just sort of the supply chain, specifically coming out of COVID. And your business has been able to take advantage of some of those public health crises, I would argue as well. But how do you think about your supply chain currently? Because a lot of it has to be embedded with standard operating procedures, of which you guys are on the forefront of developing. There's control elements to it as well in terms of storage, in terms of last mile distribution. So how have you been thinking about supply chain from a biologics perspective and serving your clients?
Sure, absolutely. First and foremost is always compliance. We want to make sure that we're providing materials in a compliant way outside the US. Regulations are tightening up in terms of transport of animal containing items across geography. So we're very mindful and very experienced in doing that. Now, with respect to supply chain, it's a lot about flexibility. At ATCC, we talk a lot about the long tail. So our collection is very, very vast. We never know when something might all of a sudden become valuable. Zika is a great instance of that. We had original strains in our collection for, I think it was over 40 years before there was, an issue that we needed to respond to. And so being flexible in that production and being able to scale up, that's something that, we're continuing to work on and build.
Yeah. And so you talked about earlier too, like just the level of high quality biological materials that are required to support research across a variety of sectors, and particularly emerging sectors. And we're all very familiar with sort of the umbrella life sciences, which is very broad, and would encompass things like ag tech, would encompass things like food research. But when you think about some of these other sectors, right, beyond just biologics, small molecule development, things that are happening in pharma, where do you see some of the opportunities?
We see opportunities around that transition of moving away from animal testing. So we've always been known for in vitro models. We're continuing to advance our investments around microphysiological systems. So these are 3D systems. These could be organ on a chip. These rely on different, these have different characteristics and different outputs than the traditional, preclinical models that folks have relied on. So that transition is really important. We see a lot of movement around that and desire to move away from animal testing globally, right? In the EU, and certainly the FDA has expressed that desire as well. Other emerging areas, artificial cultured meat, right? So
Yeah.
in food, it's actually really surprising to see what we have in our collection that pertains to this area. So a great group here at ATCC recently pulled together the resources to say, what do we actually have? And we put together a food production related page so that folks can come to us for those items that are both standards in production of artificial cultured meat, but also to ensure the safety and quality testing related to food supply.
Yeah. Look, I think the idea of lab culture meat is a tough notion or concept for folks to wrap their head around. But certainly, there's been a lot of work being done, everything from poultry to seafood, and it's just really interesting to think about how you're diversifying your product offering, but then also to a certain degree allows you to de-risk a little bit, right? Having the ability to service multiple clients across multiple sectors. And so, in your role leading global strategy, how do you mitigate risks in particular? And how do you think about solving for some of the challenges of the future?
Yeah. Life science will always be the majority of what ATCC focuses on and supports, but we are really diverse. That long tail absolutely comes into play when we think about supporting other industries and supporting the growth outside of life science in particular. Now, when it comes to risk, that mitigation, that diversity helps, right? As you mentioned. And when I think about risk, it's two factors. One is known risk and unknown risk. So known risk, you plan for, right? And you learn about it, you put that into your critical plan. The unknown risks are actually the things that you need to be flexible enough to respond to. So organizationally looking at how do we respond when an unknown risk occurs? I mean, a great example is COVID, right? What organization really planned for that type of event? Thankfully, at ATCC, when that type of event happens, we know how to rally because we've done it before in previous pandemics. We know how to support the CDC and the public health sector, the vaccine developers to get the critical materials that they need. It is really about rallying around those unknown risks and learning, right? Learning along the way because you're never going to have perfect information about those risks.
Yeah, and public health is a big component of your work. We talked a little bit about that earlier, just the importance of having ATCC being strategically located to a lot of these federal institutions, academic institutions, R1 research institutions. So would love to learn more just about your engagement with the public sector, both from kind of your core competencies of being a repository and access to biological materials, but then also as you think about regulation.
It is wonderful to be centrally located within this biocapital hub, right? The proximity to the federal agencies, NIH, even NIST, FDA, CDC, it is great from the perspective of stakeholder engagement and being at the center of that action. ATCC has a long-standing history of supporting these public agencies through our contracted work. So we operate BEIR and IRR. These are programs that provide infectious disease-related materials for research as well as other purposes, research and development purposes, to academic and to companies. So that's really helpful when something like COVID arises, right? We partner with the federal agencies to ramp up activity. And I joined ATCC January 2020. And then I realized, oh my goodness, we were busier than we ever were, everyone working really round the clock, right, to provide all of the materials needed to study COVID, to understand what was happening, and also provide the cell models needed to do that type of discovery. Not to mention, right, the cell lines then used in vaccine development. So the proximity to that, right, can always get on the call, but the proximity and adjacency is very helpful. We have multi-decade relationships around this contracted work.
Yeah, and so it'd be interesting to me to hear more about. I mean, again, this is 4 years ago, looking at COVID, but other pandemics, certainly on a global perspective, occur or endemics, and you think about how your role has evolved, but like, what does that look like? The pandemic hits, all of a sudden you find yourself in a new role at a very premier institution that's servicing the industry as they search for a cure. And so, like, what does that look like behind the scenes?
It's a lot of learning. My background, as I described, is more med device, med tech. Coming to ATCC during that period of time, I had a lot to learn. And thankfully, right, I have to give credit to our ATCC Federal Solutions side of our organization. They're the ones who really rally, right, and take care of those relationships and the need when a pandemic arises. So, here I am in the background. I came into my office one time and then we all went remote, and there's a flurry of activity and calls. And for me, it was a lot of catch up, to be honest, right? To understand, okay, how do we support? How do we further invest in that support within the community, the public agencies, as well as our key customers, right? Our customers are very wide in that life science sector.
Yeah. I mean, you guys are servicing multiple scientific disciplines, microbiology, immunology, cancer research. And, as you see new novel technologies spin out of academia or out of larger corporations, I think there's just going to be a rise of opportunity. But, you're managing a global team of, I forget the number of employees, but a large global team. And so, taking your background as a scientist, obviously being involved with a lot of strategy and innovation, what is your approach to leadership and managing a team in general?
Yeah. Overall, ATCC has grown a lot in the time since I started. I think when I started, we were about 500 employees. Now we're over 680, close to 700. And so it's important to stay connected. At the end of the day, it's all about the people and being very mindful that we spend a lot of time with our colleagues and our teams. So making sure that we're just kind to each other, right? We enjoy the work that we do. That's so important. And I think that's a theme that stands out at ATCC and comes up time and time again. We recently had the honor of receiving a Biospace Best Place to Work, as well as other employer recognition awards. And through that, it was very clear that our people stand out. So part of my leadership style is to continue to hear and listen from the employee base, right? What's working, what's not, being willing to, change. ATCC has changed a lot over the last few years, and we continue to transform. We're shifting, right, from vial by vial and thinking about our collection or content only as physical materials to adding data as a product. And that metadata associated with our materials is incredible, right? No one else really has the ability to provide that end-to-end, highly authenticated and based on the source material, validated genome sequences, microbial reference genomes, right? And plus growth profiles, all of those other things. At the end of the day, it's, I lead by hearing, right, externally what the trends are, hearing from the teams, what they're excited about, what they're interested in, and what's working and what's not.
Yeah. And that's a great segue because, there's a lot of conversation really, I think, stemming from the launch of platforms like ChatGPT, where now AI is in the spotlight. AI really at the end of the day is really just complex algorithms of, math equations. And, but when you look at it from your lens, it's really those large molecular models that are being developed in the lab that can leverage a lot of proprietary data both for private sector, then I'm assuming for what you're doing at ATCC. And so, when you think about diversifying service lines, what is the role of big data? How are you thinking about it, and how are you approaching it?
We can't have a conversation where AI isn't tossed in, right? But it's
Yeah.
so top of mind. And it's one of those areas that are changing and evolving more rapidly than I think anyone really expected, right? And the impact
Mhm.
is going to be significant. To be honest, we're still figuring it out, right? But we know we need to be in it. We know we need to provide certain data sets, right, as reference data sets to our customers along with the materials. So we've been on that journey for the last few years. We're now contemplating how do we accelerate that? And how do we accelerate that with partners so that we can better understand how to serve their needs? I think everyone is, learning, right? And it's not enough just to let the algorithms ingest data, right? I don't think that's enough. I think we really have to figure out how to create better in silico models, and then provide the data as a product and service tied together with traditional methods.
Yeah. And so when you think about tying data into products and services, ATC, given your nonprofit status, but also the notion you made earlier that you do need to generate revenues to support and your
Mhm.
operations and research, and so do you envision, given the fact that I would argue you're sitting on a very large data set, years and generations of research and cataloging, and understanding the nuances of what's there is probably would take just as long to go through and read, right? But um, I guess, are you thinking about this in the lens of, hey, we're going to open source a lot of what we have, or are you looking at it as an economic opportunity to commercialize and develop products that you would then go to market with?
I think it's an and proposition. We're doing what we can and self-investing in that data generation, right? As reference genomes, et cetera. The Genome Portal is a great example of that. We've completely provided that through, investing in that platform on our own. We're just starting to ask for some support to sustain that work. And so we're very willing to do that on our own, but I know it's not enough, right? We can't
Mhm.
scale and get to the level of, the level of multiple slices of metadata that we need to be really valuable without the right partners, without the right customers telling us how do they want to use it, how do they want it structured and annotated, and we're not the experts, right, around data curation and data storage for the purpose that we're talking about, right? We're good in many things, but we're going to need to leverage the external ecosystem to accelerate our work and provide the level of data associated with our materials that exists. A lot of it just hasn't been made digitally
Mhm.
available yet to our customers.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it is the housekeeping, and
Mhm.
I live in data. I'm empirically minded, I would argue as well, and so part of what I think about too is just how you have to pull perspective from your team, given not just AI. I mean, that's a big 10,000 level view conversation, but bringing in the experts that understand it, I think, is equally as important as bringing the experts that understand policy or understands how to, provide educational training resources to your clients. So when you think about your team broadly and the culture at ATCC, um, tell me more about what that's like at the company.
Yeah, and that's been part of my role here. So
Yeah.
when I joined, my first task was actually designing and implementing an innovation program. And then after that, it was technology scouting program of sorts, right, called Hunt, Gather, Translate. And a lot of that effort was to make sure that ATCC did bring in external thinking and get outside of our existing, ways of working and knowledge base. That's just really important. As I mentioned, right, the desire to bring in partners to help us on this journey of transformation and data, that has to be part of our strategy. We absolutely cannot make these shifts alone and think that we know everything, right? So we're just not. So the approach is, learn from others who are smarter than you, honestly, right? And who are the actual end users. We know what we have. We have a vast content of materials, right? I can list for you 4,000 cell lines and, the number changes, but 30,000 microbial items. A lot of that is untapped potential. We actually have partners currently who are helping us understand some of the items that are non-model organisms, so things that people don't typically work with, to sequence them and say, do they have interesting characteristics or functions that were previously unknown, right? We need others to kind of do that work with us.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation a few weeks back with a venture capital leader, and they were talking about the fact that they're not looking to invest any longer in novel technologies, niche products. And so, or rather not novel technologies, but in these sort of specialized technologies, right, that have a very small, maybe commercialization opportunity. So what are you seeing in with that comment in mind? What are you seeing in that front?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of untapped potential in the existing diversity of what ATCC is holding, right? Both in the diversity we just talked about, okay, we have data that's untapped, right? But we have a lot of materials, right, that are unexplored, either because they're hard to grow or they just haven't been sequenced yet, right? And so for a VC, I can absolutely see that's untapped potential that could lead to an accelerated path forward for drug discovery or natural products or whatever sector, right, they're interested in.
Yeah. And so, you have your R&D operations in Maryland in the I-270 biotech corridor. You're a neighbor of ours. You're located, within probably a stone's throw of where we sit here at Sure Partners. And so what does the Maryland community mean to you?
Yeah, ATCC is proud to be a strong member of this capital area health and life science industry. Our roots are really deep. We, I think it was 1964, had headquarters in Rockville, Maryland. We've expanded from there and moved, clearly. But we're very committed to being in the region and a strong life science employer. Our diverse workforce as well is an important element of our strength. We support a highly educated scientific workforce. Over a third of our workforce has bachelor degrees, and then about a quarter has more advanced degrees, masters or PhDs. And majority of that is within the sciences and predominantly life sciences, right? So we see ourselves as a fertile training ground for developing scientific careers for the region. And so we not only have customers here, we not only have partners in the area, but as a employer and developing the life science talent in the region, I think we play a pretty significant role, and we look forward to continuing to do that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you all have had a tremendous presence, and you really have, as far as I'm aware, made tremendous impacts in the space, just in supporting technological innovation, advancement, research. Admittedly, I probably didn't understand the breadth of your offerings initially, but then as I started to prepare for this meeting, I could spend hours and days and months and years going through it all. So, obviously we're kind of hitting a variety of topics quickly, but Ruth, you also, mentioned in our in our prior conversation, just preparing for this, just about the level of diversity that you have at ATCC. So can you talk to us more about just how you're intentional with that, and in particular, how you're thinking about DEI right now?
That's a great question. And myself, as a diverse leader, it's something that's top of mind. I really look to increase the level of diverse leadership at ATCC, and hopefully that transcends into kind of our community within the BioCapital region. Right, we need to feed that pipeline and develop leadership in order to be successful in having more diverse perspectives. All the research says that organizations that have diverse leadership performs better, top line, bottom line. Whether you look at stock prices, right? That's not relevant to us, but all the research says that diverse perspectives lead to stronger organizations. ATCC is majority female as well, currently in our employer base for a scientific organization, a technical scientific organization. I think that's something to be proud of.
Yeah, an opportunity to join the Women in Bio annual awards a few weeks back, and most of, frankly, the graduate completions that are taking place in higher education are specifically for scientists, women, and which is an incredible thing. And having more diversity is something that I think everyone wants in the industry, and something that when you think about ATCC, it's not only the diverse collection of biological products that you have, but it's kind of taking that thematically and integrate it into your culture. So that's really well stated, and we obviously are very proud to be part of the community of which you all are supporting as well. You've been nominated, and ATCC has been nominated as a finalist for the BioBuzz Awards. And so what does that mean for you and your team to be selected as a finalist from your peers in the industry?
Well, first, it's a real honor. And we have some amazing peers in this category. And to be a nonprofit in this category as well, we take great pride in that. We've made significant investments in our people, and continuing to do that over time. We expect to grow in the region and support that strong development of life science and scientific talent in the region.
Yeah. And so, Ruth, we really appreciate you sharing some insights today. Obviously, we don't have a ton of time with these podcast series, but I think this conversation certainly warrants a follow-up. So we hope to see you soon in person for that, and potentially a tour of ATCC and your facilities.
We would love that. Thank you very much, Devin.
Yeah, so tune in next time for BioBlast. And again, Ruth Chang, the General Manager and Senior Vice President of ATCC.
Thank you.